Hello again, everyone. Edwin Leonard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Steve McNair. This, you could say, is a retro video because Steve McNair was a legend with the Tennessee Titans, an NFL team. He was shot and killed in 2009, more specifically July 4th, 2009, the police investigation crew had concluded that he died due to a suicide murder. And what it was is that apparently what happened was you could say his girlfriend, woman that he was having, you could say the interlude with, had shot him multiple times, and then she shot herself. There's some people that, people prominent in his life, Steve McNair's life, I would say could be in denial, that are refuting this, as far as this conclusion of the murder-suicide. It does appear that that's what actually transpired, though, but to this day there's still some controversy and debate over how he actually died. I believe this was likely the cause, though, what the police had ruled. But anyway, we're coroner, whoever ruled it. Now I'm going to be talking about some natal placements of Steve McNair and his in transits to his chart that might have been tied in with this, and also with his girlfriend at the time as well. I'm going to talk about his chart first and his transits, then I'm going to go to the woman's chart and her transits. Now, Steve McNair does not have a time of birth online, so I had to improvise once again and do a solar/sunrise chart in which I put the sun at the same spot as the ascendant. Now I'm seeing a number of things, talk about some natal placements and transits that may have been tied in with this in his chart. Now the thing is, he had a transit Chiron appears to be not far from his natal sun in Aquarius at the time. This could indicate suffering, wounds connected with his life. Transit Neptune was also conjoined his sun as well at this time. Transit Neptune was also, and I don't know, again, can't really say if the transit Chiron is exactly conjunct his, not exactly conjunct his sun, but if it falls in that conjunction, but it is close to a conjunction from what I can see. And transit Neptune appears to be conjunct his natal sun at the time of his death and his murder. And Neptune can be about dissolving and dissipation, and the sun, of course, could be about life. When transit Neptune hits one's sun, it seems like, this could really increase the propensity for that life of dissipating and dissolving. And with the sun in Aquarius, it could very well, was a life of altruism and a lot of selflessness, and, just being, very unobtrusive. I believe he did a number of humanitarian things for others. And the thing is, I'm looking at the chart as well, and even though it's in the solar/sunrise chart, he has Jupiter and Venus in the 12th house of clandestine affairs. Venus, of course, could be associated with love and romance. And Venus being in Aquarius could be ones of a very unusual, unorthodox type of nature. And the fact, he was married at the time, and it's also falls in the house of sadly of suicide. Now he didn't kill himself, but a suicide was connected with his death due to the fact that the woman committed suicide. And when you have Venus falling in the 12th house, I would say that could be an indicator of a lover that might actually kill herself. Remember, again, the 12th house is the house of suicide. The ruler of his 8th house in the solar sunrise chart falls in that 12th house of suicide, and that is, again, Venus in Aquarius. He has, in the solar sunrise chart, he has Libra on the cusp of his 8th house, and Libra, of course, can be connected with relationships. And Pluto, even though it's in the 7th house, it's not far from that. So it's not really, that could be an indication or greater propensity from some kind of murder from somebody you were in, sexual connection with. And Pluto being in the seventh house, that could even be, death associated with somebody you're in in a relationship with anyway. And interesting, I mean, he has Pluto retrograde in his chart, and you know, it was a death, from and again, the seventh house can be connected with relationships. Pluto retrograde could be a self-murder, really like a suicide because it's going inward. The woman wound up again killing herself, being a suicide. The thing when I noticed too, though, this is all going off on a Gemini moon tangent here. I noticed in the solar sunrise chart in the 10th house cusp is that Neptune is there in Sagittarius. Now Neptune can have big dreams. Neptune in Sagittarius may fantasize and dream about being a sports athlete, being conjunct the 10th house cusp. Well, that may have manifested in those dreams of being a sports athlete, manifesting into a reality with a career. And also too, at the time of his death, his murder, transit Pluto was not far from his natal Mars. Now, it may not have been conjunct as far as the transit orb goes, but that can be an indication of a murder, a death through gunfire. Mars could be connected with volatility, can be associated with gunfire, and it's also in Capricorn, the sign very strongly associated with planning and premeditation. The thing about this too is, based on the solar sunrise chart, it puts Steve McNair's moon at 17 degrees Cancer. The woman that fatally shot him had her Mars very close conjunct his natal moon, and moon can be associated with the chest, and so can the zodiac sign Cancer. And Mars again could be about assault and gunfire, and one of the shots did hit Steve McNair's chest, so I thought that was interesting. Steve McNair also has on the 4th house cusp in the solar sunrise chart, he has Gemini on it, and the 4th house cusp is connected with the end of life, and it shows that a Gemini sadly was likely prominent in it because the woman that shot him had her sun in Gemini. Also, Saturn in Gemini falls in that 4th house as well, and Saturn in the 4th house by itself could show some kind of restrictions or sorrow in the end of one's life. The ruler of that 4th house cusp of Gemini is Mercury in Pisces and falls in the 1st house. Now, the significance in this is that even though, the 1st house is associated with the early childhood, I think that can also be an indication of the end of life coming earlier than what would ordinarily be anticipated. That's just in theory, though, on my part. But anyway, another thing is that he does have the ruler of his 12th house, which is Saturn. Capricorn is on the 12th house cusp, and the ruler of it, Saturn, is in the 4th house of the end of life. Could be an indication that there may be restrictions or limitations that are associated with one's end of life, and it's the latter part of life that was restricted, that did not even transpire. We're saying, for argument's sake, the latter part of life being the last third of one's life, being age roughly 50 to 75 or so on average. So that did not even transpire, actually, sadly, for Steve McNair. So it's really and he also had the transit Sun in Cancer, not far from the natal moon in Cancer. The Sun could be the physical body. It is Sun in Cancer. The zodiac sign Cancer can be connected with the chest, the breast area, and the moon is the same as well. the life was going to figure prominently with a prominent woman in his life scheme at this point in time. So it's terrible that this actually had to transpire, sadly, but I mean, unfortunately, it was something that did happen, and it's very unfortunate, the circumstances. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that. I'm back. But anyway, I'm going to go over to the girlfriend's chart, if you could just bear with me, people. And I don't have the time of birth for her either, but her name is Sahel Kazemi. Well, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. And I'm going to look at her natal chart and some transits that might have been tied in with her, apparently murdering Steve McNair and shooting herself. Now, another thing that I've noticed, I mean, well, she had the sun in Gemini, and of course, Gemini, sun in negative manifestation can be very mercurial, vacillating, and unpredictable. And the thing about it is, she's also has, interestingly enough, she has the Jupiter conjunct her Venus in Gemini. So that shows that could be very fortuitous for money and love, but it could also be a variety of people that she may have loved. Now, I don't know if she was involved with anybody else at the time of Steve McNair's passing, but apparently she had killed him because, if I'm not mistaken, there was reason to believe she at least likely knew, or she was suspicious of some other affair Steve McNair was having, and this was due perhaps to jealousy and vengeance, one of those things where, if I can't have you, then nobody else is going to have you. At the time, and I'm also looking too, sadly, I mean, this is a solar sunrise chart, but what's interesting about her Mercury, it's not shocking that the Mercury is afflicted fairly strongly, because now being in the zodiac sign, being in Taurus, that's not in, it's not afflicted really by, it's not afflicted by sign because it's not in its detriment or fall, but I mean, it's not at all afflicted by sign being in it because it's not in its detriment or fall, but it's in the accidental detriment and fall in the 12th house. Being in Taurus, I mean, there might have been issues with self-worth and self-esteem. It's in the 12th house of suicide, and it's also intercepted in that 12th house as well, and it's at 29 degrees, which is a critical and anaretic degree. And this could have maybe been some instability with her thinking. Sun in Gemini may have in negative manifestation, maybe somewhat erratic, mercurial, and vacillating, unstable anyway. Then she's got the Mercury based on the solar sunrise time at 29 degrees, and it could show there might have been constant nervousness, worrisome energy, even connected with monetary matters, if I'm not mistaken. At the time, when she got Steve McNair to come over to her home, whether it was late July 3rd or early July 4th, is that she had apparently had some, she was in distress over monetary matters. And transit Venus was not far from her Mercury at the time of this shooting, of her, apparently killing Steve McNair. And this could indicate more nervousness in monetary matters at this time, issues with self-esteem that were very, being in Taurus, very enduring, perhaps. And transit Mars was not far from her Mercury at the time. Now, it may not have been, I don't believe it was conjunct as far as the transit orbs go, but at the same time, as I've stated previously, I don't think we can definitively say that a transit doesn't feel, transiting planet to a natal point doesn't feel some vibration or energy, even if it's a little bit out of the orb for the aspect. And having transit Mars not far from Mercury, well, keep in mind, I mean, Mercury is also, anatomically in astrology, it's connected with the brain. And Mars, of course, is gunfire. And I think a lot of this, I mean, may have been connected. A lot of these issues, this Taurus energy, again, the self-esteem, self-worth, how one feels about oneself, in the 12th house of secret sorrows, the house of suicide as well. Now, another thing is that her Mars by sign is afflicted because it's in its fall in Cancer, and it's in that second house in the solar sunrise chart of self-esteem and self-worth. She also has her Mars making an opposition to her natal Neptune. And it tells me that, that the anger, Mars in Cancer by itself is more likely to pout and sulk and brood as opposed to acting on anger. Mars is in its fall in Cancer for a reason. I have my Mars in its fall in Cancer as well. But anyway, she has it opposing her Neptune. What's interesting with that, what that tells me is that sadly, she may have been a person that may have had a hard time embarking or actually taking action on her dreams, on her fantasies, and being Neptune and Capricorn. Perhaps those dreams connected with business, the career, the ambitions. And also she has that Neptune is in the 8th house. And it's the 8th house is connected with death. Neptune is associated with suicide. At the time, transit Pluto was not far from her natal Uranus, and that could be an indication of a death that could happen, very unexpectedly, unpredictably, in the sign of depressive Capricorn as well. So there was some despondency and depression at this time. She has in the solar sunrise chart, she has Capricorn on the 8th house cusp of death, and she's got the 3 planets in there, including Neptune, the planet connected with suicide, in the despondent sign of Capricorn. Now, another thing too I'm noticing is that transit Neptune was not far from her natal North Node, and you'd hate to say that something was destined, preordained, or to happen, but the North Node is connected with one's future. She had it in Aquarius in the sign associated with the future. Transit Neptune, Neptune again is about suicide, and 29 degrees is the critical degree in astrology, and it's also Aquarius is the sign of what's unusual, unpredictable. Transit Chiron is not far from the North Node, and Chiron can be about not just emotional ones but physical ones as well. And just trying to see if there's anything else to talk about as far as her chart and transits that may have been tied in to her passing. Now, she did have Pluto, though it's retrograde. Pluto was retrograde in Scorpio, sign of vengeance and vindictiveness, and it's also jealousy. And being retrograde, appears to be retrograde anyway. I'm going with it right now. You may want to confirm, look that up. But the thing is, it does appear to be retrograde, and that's again, retrograde energy is going inward. That could be an indicator of a suicide, of shooting oneself. At the time, it looks like, meaning though it's a solar sunrise chart, but transit Saturn was very close to the 5th house cusp. And the 5th house cusp is our enjoyment, what we love, lovers. Saturn can also be older people, but it's also despondency. And being in Virgo, worrisome energy, anxiety, and in that 5th house of love and romance, and it can be superficial, affairs or connections at the time. And another thing is that transit Mercury appears not to be that far from her natal Chiron. Mercury can be connected with the brain. Chiron is connected with wounds. She had her natal Chiron in Cancer, so I'm wondering if there might have been some suffering or despondency connected with her home, her family, her emotional security. It seemed like she was needing in money a lot during her life, and or at least toward the end of her own life. She has Leo on the cusp of the fourth house in the solar sunrise chart, so that could be an indicator of the end of life being dramatic, something that gained some notoriety and attention, sadly, which is what happened. And going back to I want to talk a little bit more again about the Neptune transit. She had it in the 10th house in her solar sunrise chart, so that's something where an indicator of the suicide gaining sadly gaining notoriety, attention, and recognition. She had both rulers of that 10th house, Aquarius, Saturn and Uranus both rule Aquarius, fall in the 8th house of death. So this is a death where she became infamous, unfortunately, where she might have gained more attention and fame, sadly, due to her death than the time that she was alive during the clandestine affair with Steve McNair. So anyway, there's really not much more for me to get into than that, and I just wanted to talk about it. And also, even though I understand the circumstances connected with Steve McNair's death were unscrupulous, but to try to remember him, for the positive and the fact he was very altruistic, a humanitarian, and to remember that Titan. This is Edwin Learned, and until next time, people, stay well. Sorry, we're going to have a little wobble here, people. Sorry, might be the moon causing this a little bit.